They left her to drown. 21 years of scrubbing their floors, swallowing their fists, taking their poison, and when the ice cracked beneath the gathering's greatest wolves, not one of them reached for Arlen Voss. She was wolfless, cursed. Nothing. But when the High Alpha himself vanished beneath black water, something inside her chest, something ancient and burning, refused to let him die. What happened next shattered every law of the frozen territories. Stay until the end to see how the servant no one believed in became the wolf everyone feared. Hit like, and comment what city you're watching from. The cold owned Frostfang. It wasn't the kind of cold you could dress against. It lived in the stone walls, in the frozen earth beneath the stronghold, in the very air that filled your lungs each morning. It was patient and cruel, waiting for any sign of weakness. And in Frostfang, weakness meant death. Arlen Voss had survived 21 years of it. She knelt in the eastern corridor on the third floor, her knuckles split and bleeding as she worked a stiff brush against stone that hadn't been truly clean in decades. The water in her bucket had a skin of ice forming at the edges. Her fingers were numb inside her threadbare gloves, gloves that had been thrown at her 3 winters ago by a kitchen maid who'd gotten new ones. "Put your back into it, Voss." The voice came from somewhere behind her. Arlen didn't turn around. She knew better. She pressed harder against the stone, ignoring the way her shoulders burned, the way her lower back sent sharp protests up her spine. The stain she was scrubbing, some ancient spill of wine or blood or both, had been there longer than she'd been alive. It would probably still be there long after she was gone. But she scrubbed anyway, because that's what you did when you were nothing. Above her, the stronghold buzzed with activity. The grand gathering had begun 3 days ago, and Frostfang had transformed. Banners from every territory in the frozen lands hung from the rafters, crimson and silver for Iron Fang, deep blue and white for Wintermaw, black and gold for Shadow Peak. Alphas walked the halls like gods among mortals, their warriors trailing behind them, hands never far from their weapons. Arlen had carried most of their supplies. She'd hauled crates up from the frozen storage cellars until her arms shook. She'd polished silver serving platters until her reflection stared back at her. A thin, colorless girl with dark hair that never seemed to lay flat, and eyes that had learned not to meet anyone else's. She'd been shoved into walls, had her feet stepped on, had bowls of scraps thrown at her when the kitchen staff was in a mood. It was better than some days. The sound of boots echoed down the corridor, multiple sets moving fast. Arlen recognized the rhythm. Young wolves, probably heading to the training yards or the Great Hall. She had maybe 3 seconds. She pressed herself flat against the wall, making herself as small as possible, her eyes locked on the wet stone at her feet. The group rounded this corner, 5 of them, all close to her age, all dressed in fine furs and leather that actually fit. Their voices carried that particular blend of confidence and cruelty that came from never having been told no. Saw him take down Greymarch's second son in under a minute. Greymarch's second son is slow, my father says. They swept past her like she was furniture. One of them, a tall boy with red hair, kicked her bucket as he passed. Water sloshed across the floor, erasing an hour of work. They didn't even look back. Arlen waited until their voices faded before she moved. She righted the bucket, salvaged what water she could, and started over. Her hands were shaking. Not from cold, not from exhaustion, from the heat. It lived in her chest, just beneath her ribs. A constant, inexplicable warmth that had been there as long as she could remember. It didn't burn, it didn't hurt. It just existed, like a second heartbeat, pulsing quietly beneath her skin. She'd never told anyone about it. In Frostfang, being different meant being dead. And Arlen was already different enough. The sun was setting by the time Margit found her. Margit was the head cook, a thick-shouldered woman with flour permanently embedded under her nails and a voice that could strip paint. She appeared at the end of the corridor, breathing hard from the stairs, her face red. "Voss, there you are. Stop scrubbing that damn floor and get down to the kitchens. We're drowning." Arlen set down her brush and stood, her knees protesting. "Yes, ma'am. And for hell's sake, try not to break anything this time." Arlen followed her down 3 flights of narrow stairs, through passages that smelled like old stone and damp fur, until they reached the kitchens. It was chaos. Steam filled the air, pots boiled over. Someone was shouting about burnt bread. The other servants moved in a frantic dance, chopping, stirring, plating, running. Arlen had worked here often enough to know where she fit. Nowhere, really. But she made herself useful anyway. Platters need to go up to the Great Hall, Margit barked, shoving a massive tray into Arlen's arms. And don't drop it. The tray was loaded with roasted venison, the meat still steaming, the smell rich enough to make Arlen's empty stomach clench. She hadn't eaten since yesterday. There'd been half a bowl of thin porridge at dawn, but one of the other servants had knocked it out of her hands before she'd finished. Accidents happened. She carried the tray up the servants' stairs, her arms burning under the weight. The Great Hall was on the second floor, and by the time she reached it, sweat was running down her spine despite the cold. The doors were open. Music spilled out, drums and pipes, the kind of wild, driving rhythm that made wolves want to fight, or dance, or both. Arlen hesitated at the threshold. Servants weren't supposed to linger, deliver and disappear. But she couldn't help looking. The hall was packed. Long tables stretched the length of the room, covered in food and drink. Wolves filled every bench, alphas and their families, warriors, heirs. They shouted and laughed and slammed their fists on the tables hard enough to make the plates jump. At the far end, on a raised platform, sat the most important wolves. Theron Frostfang, the ruling alpha of this territory, held the center seat. He was a big man, broad and scarred, with silver threading through his dark beard. His eyes were the color of old ice, and they missed nothing. To his right sat his son, Cade. 24, built like a sledgehammer, with his father's eyes and his mother's cruel mouth. And to Theron's left, Arlen's breath caught. She'd never seen the High Alpha in person before. Hrothgar Stormfang sat like he was carved from the same stone as the mountains themselves. He was older than she'd expected. Gray streaked his dark hair and deep lines marked his face. But age hadn't weakened him. If anything, it had refined him into something more dangerous. His presence filled the room without him saying a word. When he moved, everyone noticed. When he spoke, everyone listened. "Voss, move!" Arlen jerked back to awareness. Another servant was trying to get past her with a tray of wine. She stepped aside quickly, nearly dropping her own platter, and hurried to the serving table. She set the venison down among the other dishes and turned to leave. "Wait." The voice was quiet, but it stopped her cold. She turned slowly. A man stood a few feet away, watching her. He was tall, maybe mid-20s, with dark hair that fell past his jaw and eyes the color of winter sky. He wore Iron Fang colors, crimson and silver, and carried himself like someone who'd never lost a fight. Cale Ironfang, the Iron Fang heir. Arlen had heard the other servants talking about him. Dangerous, brilliant, ruthless when he needed to be. His eyes were locked on her face. "What's your name?" he asked. Arlen's throat went dry. "Arlen? Arlen what?" "Voss." Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, maybe. Or distaste. Hard to tell. "You're the one they call cursed." It wasn't a question. Arlen didn't answer. There was no point. Cale studied her for another moment, his gaze moving over her face like he was committing it to memory. Then he turned away. "Get back to work," he said, his voice already dismissive. Arlen fled. The next 2 hours blurred together. More platters. More stares. More shouts from Margit. By the time the last of the food had been sent up, Arlen's legs felt like water, and her hands were cramping. "Clean the floor," Margit ordered, pointing at the disaster zone around the main prep table. "Then you're done." Arlen grabbed a bucket and a rag and got on her knees. The other servants filtered out, heading to their quarters or to whatever corner of the stronghold they called home. Arlen worked in silence, scrubbing grease and sauce and bits of food from the stone floor. The heat in her chest pulsed steadily, a quiet comfort against the exhaustion. She was almost finished when she heard voices. 2 people coming down the back stairs. She recognized one of them immediately, Cade Frostfang, the Alpha's son. His voice was unmistakable, sharp and arrogant. "Doesn't matter what the High Alpha wants. This is our territory. Your father seems to think otherwise." The second voice was unfamiliar. Female. Calm. "My father is old. He's cautious. I'm not." Arlen kept her head down, scrubbing the same spot over and over, trying to be invisible. They entered the kitchen. Cade was dressed for the gathering. Fine furs, polished leather, a knife at his belt that probably cost more than Arlen would see in her lifetime. The woman with him wore Wintermaw blue, her blonde hair braided in an intricate pattern that marked her as highborn. Cade's eyes swept the room and landed on Arlen. His lip curled. "You're still here." Arlen didn't respond. "I asked you a question, wolfless." She looked up slowly. "I'm cleaning, my lord." "You're breathing my air." He took a step closer. "Do you know what we do with broken things in Frostfang?" The blonde woman touched his arm. "Cade, leave her." "Why? She's nothing. Less than nothing." He crouched down, bringing his face level with Arlen's. His breath smelled like wine and meat. "You know what they say about your mother, don't you?" Arlen's jaw tightened. "They say she opened something, some old seal, some forbidden place. That's why you're like this, cursed, ruined." He smiled. "Maybe we should throw you back into whatever hole she crawled out of." The heat in Arlen's chest flared. For just a second, one brief, dangerous second, she wanted to hit him, wanted to drive her fist into his smug face and watch him bleed. But she didn't. She lowered her eyes and said nothing. Cade laughed. "That's what I thought." He stood and walked away, the blonde woman following. Their voices faded up the stairs. Arlen sat on the cold floor, her hands shaking, the heat in her chest burning hotter than it ever had before. She forced it down, forced everything down, and went back to scrubbing. She finished near midnight. The stronghold had quieted. Most of the wolves were either drunk, asleep, or still celebrating in the great hall. Arlen hauled the bucket back to the storage closet, dumped the filthy water, and stood in the darkness for a moment, just breathing. Her body ached. Her hands were raw. Her stomach was a hollow knot. Tomorrow would be worse. Tomorrow was the lake ceremony. She'd heard the servants whispering about it all week. Every 20 years, the territories gathered on the sacred frozen lake north of the stronghold. It was tradition, a show of strength and unity. The High Alpha himself would preside, and Arlen would be there. Not to participate, never that, but Margaret had already told her she'd be hauling supply crates to the lakeshore. Someone had to do the grunt work. It was always her. Arlen made her way through the dark corridors to the servants' quarters, a long, low-ceilinged room in the basement, lined with narrow cots. Most of the other servants were already asleep, bundled under whatever blankets they'd managed to scrounge. Arlen's cot was at the far end, near the door. No blanket. The last one had been stolen 2 weeks ago. She lay down on the thin mattress, pulled her arms inside her shirt for warmth, and closed her eyes. The heat in her chest pulsed. "What are you?" she thought, not for the first time. It never answered. Bus. Morning came too fast. Arlen woke to Margit's voice bellowing through the quarters. "Up, all of you! There's work to do!" The other servants groaned and stumbled out of their cots. Arlen moved on autopilot, splashed freezing water on her face, pulled on her boots, tied her hair back with a frayed piece of leather. Breakfast was a bowl of watery oats. She managed 3 bites before someone knocked it out of her hands. "Clumsy?" the girl said, walking away. Arlen stared at the spilled oats for a moment, then went to find Margit. The cook was waiting in the courtyard, standing next to a sled loaded with crates. "There you are. These need to go to the lake. Don't lose anything." Arlen looked at the sled. There had to be 200 pounds of supplies stacked on it. "All of it?" she asked. "You see anyone else volunteering?" Arlen grabbed the rope and started pulling. The path to the lake was 3 miles of frozen hell. The sled's runners caught on every rock and ice ridge. The rope bit into her shoulders, even through her coat. The wind cut across the open ground like knives. But the heat in her chest kept her moving. It pulsed steadily, pushing back against the cold, keeping her blood flowing when it should have frozen solid. By the time she reached the lake, her lungs burned and her legs trembled, and she stopped breathing. The lake stretched out before her like a sheet of black glass. It was massive, easily a mile across, and perfectly flat. The ice was so clear you could see the dark water moving beneath it. Torches ringed the edges, their flames reflected in the frozen surface. And the wolves were already gathering, hundreds of them, alphas and their families, warriors in full armor, heirs dressed in their finest. They stood in loose groups, talking and laughing, their breath misting in the freezing air. Arlen stayed at the edge near the supply point and started unloading crates. She kept her head down, moved quietly, did her job. No one looked at her. She was halfway through the second crate when she heard the horn. It was a deep, resonant sound that echoed across the lake and the mountains beyond. Everyone turned toward the sound. The High Alpha had arrived. Hrothgar Stormfang walked onto the ice like he owned it. His honor guard flanked him, massive wolves, each one a legend in their own right. He wore simple furs, no crown, no decorations. He didn't need them. When he reached the center of the lake, the crowd fell silent. "Tonight," he said, his voice carrying across the ice without effort, "we honor the old ways. We stand on sacred ground beneath the eyes of our ancestors, and we remember what it means to be strong." The wolves howled in response, a sound that shook the air and vibrated through Arlen's bones. She shivered. Hrothgar continued speaking, but Arlen only half listened. She was watching the ice. There was something wrong with it. She couldn't explain how she knew, but the heat in her chest was pulsing faster now, almost frantic, like a warning. She scanned the surface. Everything looked fine, smooth, solid, but the feeling wouldn't go away. And then she heard it. A crack, faint at first, like someone stepping on a frozen puddle, then louder. The ice beneath the center of the crowd split with a sound like thunder. Chaos erupted. The surface shattered in a spiderweb pattern, huge chunks breaking away and tilting into the freezing water below. Wolves scrambled backward, shouting, reaching for each other. Young wolves, children, some of them, fell through the gaps. Their screams cut through the night. Arlen watched in horror as they hit the water and disappeared beneath the black surface. The warriors surged forward, reaching for the holes, but the ice kept breaking. Every step sent more cracks spreading outward. They couldn't get close. And then the High Alpha fell. Hrothgar Stormfang dropped through the ice without a sound, his body swallowed by black water in an instant. The entire gathering froze. No one moved. Not the warriors, not the alphas, not the wolves who had sworn their lives to protect him. They just stood there, staring at the hole where their king had vanished. Arlen's body moved before her brain caught up. She ran. Her boots slipped on the ice, nearly sending her sprawling, but she didn't slow down. She could hear people shouting behind her, confused, angry, afraid, but she didn't stop. She reached the nearest fracture and dove. The cold hit her like a hammer. It punched the air from her lungs, wrapped around her chest like iron bands, and tried to drag her down into the black. Her vision went white. Her muscles seized, but the heat in her chest exploded. It surged through her veins like fire, burning away the cold, forcing her body to move when it should have shut down. She kicked hard, her eyes adjusting to the darkness. She saw movement, a small shape struggling weakly. Arlen grabbed the young wolf by the scruff and hauled them upward. Her lungs screamed, her vision blurred, but she broke the surface. Hands reached down, someone's father, their face twisted with fear, and pulled the child out. Arlen didn't wait. She gulped air and dove again. The second wolf was deeper. A girl, maybe 10, her eyes wide with terror. Arlen grabbed her arm and kicked upward with everything she had. They surfaced together. More hands, more shouting. Arlen dove again, and again, and again. Each time the cold bit deeper. Each time her strength faded, but the heat kept burning, kept her alive, kept her moving when her body begged her to stop. She lost count. 4 wolves, 5, 6. Her vision was fading, her limbs felt like stone, and then she saw him. Hrothgar Stormfang, sinking slowly through the black water, his eyes closed, his massive body still. Arlen's lungs were empty. Her body was shutting down. She had nothing left to give, but she dove anyway. The water crushed her. The darkness swallowed her whole. She couldn't see, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. She just reached. Her fingers brushed fabric, his cloak. She grabbed it with both hands and pulled. The heat in her chest detonated. It wasn't warmth anymore. It was pure, raw power. It filled every cell in her body, flooding her with strength that didn't belong to her. She could feel it changing her, remaking her from the inside out. She kicked upward, dragging the High Alpha with her, her muscles screaming, her vision tunneling to a single point of light above. They broke the surface together. Arlen gasped, choking on air and water, her body convulsing. Hands grabbed her, dozens of them, and hauled her onto solid ice. She collapsed. Her body was shaking so hard her bones rattled. Her vision swam. She couldn't feel her hands or feet, but the heat was still there, still burning. Voices shouted around her. Someone was working on Hrothgar, pounding his chest, forcing water from his lungs. And then she heard him cough. The high alpha was alive. Arlen tried to lift her head, but her body wouldn't obey. She lay on the ice, staring up at the night sky, watching her breath mist in the freezing air. Faces appeared above her. Warriors. Alphas. Wolves she'd served for years without them ever looking at her twice. They were looking now. One of them was Cale Ironfang. His winter blue eyes were locked on her face, his expression unreadable. "Who is she?" someone asked. "Arlen Voss," another voice answered. "The wolfless one." "Impossible. No wolfless could—" "She just did." The voices blurred together. Arlen's vision was fading, the edges going dark. The last thing she saw before everything went black was Hrothgar Stormfang, sitting up, water streaming from his hair, his eyes finding hers across the crowd. He didn't look away. Sand. When Arlen woke, everything was soft. That was her first thought. Soft pillows, soft furs, soft mattress beneath her body. She hadn't felt anything soft in years. Her eyes opened slowly. She was in a room she didn't recognize. Small, warm, lit by a fire crackling in a stone hearth. The walls were actual walls, not the crumbling stone of the servants' quarters. "You're awake." Arlen's head snapped toward the voice. Hrothgar Stormfang sat in a chair beside her bed. The High Alpha, the king of all the territories, sitting beside her bed. Arlen tried to sit up. Her body screamed in protest. "Don't," Hrothgar said quietly. "You need to rest." Her voice came out as a croak. Her throat felt like she'd swallowed glass. He handed her a cup of water. She took it with shaking hands and drank slowly. "What you did," Hrothgar said, watching her, "should have killed you." Arlen set the cup down carefully. "I know." "Then why did you do it?" She looked at him. Really looked. The most powerful wolf in the world, asking her a question like her answer mattered. "Because no one else would," she said. The words hung in the air between them. Hrothgar's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Something that might have been respect. "What's your name?" he asked. "Arlen Voss." He repeated it slowly, like he was tasting each syllable. "Voss. I knew a woman named Voss once, long time ago." Arlen's heart stuttered. "My mother?" "Perhaps." He stood, his shadow falling across her. She was remarkable, dangerous in her way. "She's dead." "I know." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Rest. You'll need your strength." "Wait," Arlen said. Her voice was stronger now. "What happens to me now?" Hrothgar looked back at her, his expression unreadable. "That," he said quietly, "depends on what you are." The door closed behind him. Arlen lay back against the pillows, her mind racing, the heat in her chest pulsing like a second heartbeat. "What are you?" For the first time in her life, she thought she might actually find out. Outside the window, dawn was breaking over Frostfang, and nothing would ever be the same. The room they'd given her had a lock on the outside. Arlen noticed it the second morning. She'd woken to find a tray of food by the door. Real food, not scraps. And when she'd tried the handle, it had turned easily. But the scratches around the lock plate told a different story. This room had been used to keep people in before. She ate the food anyway. Bread with actual butter, strips of salted meat, an apple that wasn't half rotted. Her stomach cramped after the third bite. She wasn't used to eating this much. Outside the narrow window, Frostfang had returned to its normal rhythm. The visiting alphas were still here. She could see their banners from her vantage point, but the chaos of the lake ceremony had settled into something colder, more deliberate. 3 days had passed since she'd pulled those wolves from the water. 3 days since anyone had told her what came next. The door opened without warning. Arlen turned, half expecting Hrothgar. Instead, a woman entered, older, maybe 50, with silver hair pulled back severe and tight. She wore the deep green robes that marked her as one of Frostfang's healers. "On your feet," the woman said. Not unkind, but not warm either. "The council wants to see you." Arlen stood slowly. Her body still ached, deep bruises mottling her ribs and arms. "What council?" "You'll find out." The healer led her through corridors Arlen had never seen before. These weren't the servant passages. These were the halls where decisions got made. The stone was cleaner here. Tapestries hung on the walls depicting battles and victories from generations past. They stopped outside a heavy wooden door. "Don't speak unless spoken to," the healer said, "and for your own sake, don't lie. They'll know." Then she knocked and pushed the door open. The room inside was circular, with a domed ceiling and narrow windows that let in cold morning light. A semicircle of chairs faced the center of the room, and in those chairs sat the people who controlled Frostfang's fate. Theron Frostfang occupied the central seat, his ice-colored eyes tracking Arlen as she entered. To his right sat his son Cade, looking at her like she was something he'd scraped off his boot. To his left, several of Frostfang's senior wolves, warriors who'd earned their seats through blood and survival. And standing slightly apart from the rest, arms crossed, was Cale Ironfang. "Arlen Voss," Theron said. His voice filled the room without effort. "Do you know why you're here?" Arlen kept her eyes forward. "No, my lord." "You saved lives at the lake, including the High Alphas." He leaned forward slightly. "That doesn't happen by accident." Silence stretched out. Arlen could feel all of them watching her, weighing her, looking for weakness. "I don't understand," she said finally. "You're wolfless," Cade cut in, his voice sharp. "You've never shifted, never shown any sign of power, and yet you dove into water that should have killed you in seconds and came out alive. Not just alive, strong enough to save 7 wolves and drag my father's king back from the dead." You just what?" Cade stood, taking a step toward her. "Got lucky? Had a moment of courage?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "No, something else happened out there. Something you're not telling us." Arlen's chest tightened. The heat pulsed beneath her ribs, responding to her fear. "I don't know what you want me to say." "The truth," Theron said quietly. He raised a hand and Cade stepped back, though his eyes never left Arlen. "Your mother was Mira Voss. Do you know what she was?" Arlen's throat went dry. "A servant, like me. Before that, She never told me anything. She died when I was 7. Theron exchanged a glance with one of the older wolves. Mira Voss was a bloodline keeper, one of the last. She had access to records that went back centuries, to the old families, the original packs. He paused. She was also convicted of breaking into the sealed archives and tampering with documents that were forbidden to touch. The room went very quiet. "They exiled her," Theron continued, "stripped her of rank and cast her out. She came back years later with a child, you." His gaze was hard. "And she never explained where you came from or who your father was." Arlen's hands were shaking. She clasped them behind her back. "I didn't know any of that." "Convenient," Cade muttered. "Enough!" Cale's voice cut through the tension. He hadn't moved from his position against the wall, but everyone turned toward him anyway. "You're circling the wrong question. It doesn't matter what her mother did. What matters is what she is." Theron nodded slowly. "Agreed. Which brings us to the real issue." He looked back at Arlen. "We need to know if you're a threat." "I'm not." "You will submit to testing," Theron said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Our healers will examine you. They'll determine what kind of power you're carrying and where it came from." Arlen's pulse hammered in her ears. "And if I refuse?" Cade smiled. "Then we'll assume you're hiding something dangerous, and we'll deal with you accordingly." The threat hung in the air, clear and cold. Arlen looked at each of them in turn. Theron, calculating and controlled. Cade, eager for an excuse to hurt her. The senior wolves, watching with the blank expressions of men who'd killed before and would do it again without hesitation. And Cale, whose winter blue eyes gave nothing away. "Fine," she said. "Test me." The testing room was in the lowest level of the stronghold, carved directly into the mountain's rock. It was cold down here, colder than anywhere else, and the air had a mineral taste that coated the back of Arlen's throat. 2 healers waited for her, the silver-haired woman from before, and a younger man with ink-stained fingers and nervous eyes. "Strip to your underclothes," the woman said. Arlen did, her skin prickling in the frigid air. They had her sit on a stone bench while they worked, pressing cold instruments against her skin, drawing blood, making her breathe into strange glass tubes. "Describe the sensation," the woman said, holding a metal rod against Arlen's sternum. When you went into the water, what did you feel? Arlen hesitated. Cold, at first. And then? Heat, in my chest, like something woke up. The two healers exchanged a look. Has this heat always been there? The man asked. Yes, as long as I can remember. More looks, more whispered conversation. They made her hold different objects, stones, metals, vials of liquid. They chanted in a language she didn't recognize. They drew symbols on her skin with something that burned when it touched her. Through it all, the heat in her chest remained steady, watching, waiting. After 2 hours, they stepped back. We're done, the woman said. What did you find? Arlen asked, pulling her clothes back on. That's not for us to say. The council will review our notes. But you can go. They escorted her back to her room and locked the door behind her. Arlen stood in the center of the small space, her body aching from being poked and prodded, her mind racing. What are you? The question wouldn't leave her alone. She looked down at her hands. They were rough, scarred from years of work, ordinary hands. But the heat in her chest wasn't ordinary, and neither, apparently, was her mother. That night, someone tried to kill her. Arlen woke to the sound of the lock clicking open. She'd been dreaming about the lake, about drowning, about the cold, about hands pulling her down instead of up. Her eyes opened to darkness. The door was cracked, letting in a sliver of light from the corridor, and someone was in the room. Arlen's breath caught. She didn't move, didn't make a sound. Years of surviving in Frostfang had taught her how to be still. The figure moved closer. Big. Male. She could smell wine on him. Her mind raced through options. She had no weapon, no strength to fight someone twice her size. The window was too narrow to escape through. The figure reached the bed. Arlen rolled. She hit the floor hard, the impact jarring her bones, but she didn't stop. She scrambled toward the door, her feet slipping on cold stone. A hand grabbed her ankle. She went down, her chin cracking against the floor. Stars burst across her vision. The hand dragged her backward. Should have stayed quiet, a voice slurred, drunk, angry. Should have stayed nothing. Arlen twisted, kicking out with her free leg. Her heel connected with something soft. The grip loosened. She kicked again, harder, and broke free. She made it 2 steps before he caught her hair. Pain exploded across her scalp as he yanked her back. She stumbled, her hands coming up instinctively, and felt the heat in her chest surge. It happened without thought. Power flooded through her arms, and when her palms hit his chest, something pushed. The man flew backward, hit the wall with a bone-cracking thud, and crumpled. Arlen stood frozen, her hands still raised, her heart hammering. What the hell was that? The door burst open. Guards poured in, weapons drawn. They took in the scene. Arlen standing in the center of the room, the man unconscious against the wall. One of the guards moved to the fallen figure, rolled him over. It's Torin, he said, one of Cade's men. Another guard grabbed Arlen's arm. Don't move. He attacked me, Arlen said, her voice shaking. He came in here and save it for the council. They dragged her out of the room, through the corridors, back to the circular chamber. It was the middle of the night, but Theron was already there, dressed and alert. Cade arrived moments later, his face flushed with anger. She attacked Torin, one of the guards reported. He attacked me, Arlen shot back. He came into my room. Torin is a loyal warrior, Cade interrupted. He smelled like a distillery and tried to strangle me. You threw him across the room, the guard said, hard enough to crack stone. Silence fell. Theron's eyes narrowed. Did you? Arlen's mouth went dry. I don't know how. He grabbed me and I pushed and you used power, Theron finished. The same power that kept you alive under the ice. I didn't mean to. That's not reassuring. Cade stepped forward. This proves it. She's dangerous. We should contain her before... Before what? Cale's voice came from the doorway. He entered the room, fully dressed despite the hour, looking like he'd been awake the whole time. Before she defends herself against a drunk who broke into her room, that's your concern? Cade's face darkened. Stay out of this, Ironfang. This is Frostfang business. The High Alpha made it everyone's business when she saved his life. Hrothgar isn't here. No. But I am. Kale moved to stand beside Arlen, not quite touching her, but close enough that his presence was a clear statement. And I'm curious why one of your men decided to visit her room in the middle of the night. Torin acts on his own. Does he? Kale's tone was mild, but his eyes were cold. How convenient. Theron raised a hand. Enough. Torin will be questioned when he wakes. Arlen Voss will remain confined until we determine the extent of her abilities. He looked at Arlen. The testing will continue tomorrow, and this time we'll see exactly what you're capable of. They took her to a different room, smaller, no window. The door had 3 locks. Arlen sat on the floor, her back against the wall, and tried to stop shaking. Someone had sent Torin to kill her, or hurt her, or scare her, maybe all 3. The heat in her chest pulsed steadily, like it was trying to comfort her. What are you? She thought again. This time, deep in the back of her mind, something almost answered. Not words, not exactly. More like a feeling, a memory that wasn't hers. Ice, water, pressure, depth. Something ancient sleeping beneath frozen lakes. Something her mother had woken up, and something Arlen had inherited. She pulled her knees to her chest and waited for dawn. Bang. The second round of testing was worse. They brought her to a larger chamber, this one reinforced with iron and stone. A dozen wolves waited inside. Healers, warriors, and Theron himself. We're going to push you, Theron said. See what happens when you're threatened. Arlen's stomach dropped. You're going to attack me? We're going to see if you can control what you did last night, or if you're a danger to everyone around you. They started slow. One warrior, unarmed, told to advance on her. Arlen backed away. I don't want to hurt anyone. Then don't, Theron said. The warrior lunged. Arlen's instinct screamed. The heat surged and her hands came up. She forced it down, gritted her teeth and shoved the power back into whatever dark place it lived. The warrior grabbed her arm, twisted it behind her back. Pain shot through her shoulder. Control, Theron said. They made her do it again and again. Different warriors, different attacks. Every time Arlen fought to keep the power contained. Every time it got harder. On the 6th attempt, she failed. A warrior came at her with a practice blade, blunted but still dangerous. He swung for her ribs. She blocked, but he was stronger, faster. The blade cracked against her forearm. The heat exploded. Arlen screamed and power flooded out of her in a wave. The warrior flew backward. The other stumbled, thrown off balance by a force they couldn't see. Frost spread across the floor in crystalline patterns. Everyone froze. Arlen stood in the center of the room, breathing hard, her arms wrapped around herself. Ice clung to her skin, delicate and impossibly cold. Enough, Theron said quietly, but they didn't stop. Over the next 3 days, they pushed her harder, made her angrier, scared her on purpose. Every time the power broke free, it was stronger. She froze a bucket of water solid with a touch, shattered a stone wall when they cornered her, called ice from the air itself when a warrior drew actual blood. And through it all, the wolves watched with expressions that ranged from fear to greed to cold calculation. On the 4th day, Cade came to her cell. You're an abomination, he said through the bars. My father might be too cautious to say it, but I'm not. Whatever you are, you don't belong here. Arlen looked up at him from where she sat on the floor. Then let me leave. And have you running to another territory? Selling your power to the highest bidder? He shook his head. No, you stay here, where we can watch you, control you. I'm not a weapon. Cade smiled. You are now. The breakthrough came 5 days after the lake. Arlen was alone in her cell, staring at the ceiling when the door opened. Cale Ironfang stepped inside. Get up, he said. We're leaving. Arlen sat up slowly. What? Rothgar's Jiao, Jiji, Jiao, Jiao, Ink Jiao, Ao, Jiao, Jiji, Jiao, owning you. Privately. He tossed her a cloak. Put that on, and don't ask questions until we're clear of this wing. She didn't argue. They moved through passages Arlen had never seen, descending deeper into the mountain. The air grew colder, damper. The walls here were older, cut by hands that had been dust for centuries. Finally, Cale stopped outside a door marked with symbols Arlen didn't recognize. The High Alpha is inside, he said. He wants to talk to you, alone. Why? Because he knows what you are. Kale met her eyes. And he's going to tell you the truth, whether you're ready for it or not. He opened the door. Arlen stepped through. The room beyond was small, lit by a single lantern. Hrothgar Stormfang sat at a wooden table, a collection of ancient books spread before him. He looked up as she entered. "Sit," he said. Arlen sat. Hrothgar pushed one of the books toward her. The pages were yellow with age, covered in handwriting so faded it was barely legible. "Your mother didn't just break into the archives," he said quietly. "She found something. A record of the old bloodlines, the ones that existed before the territories formed, before the pacts, as we know them." Arlen's hands trembled as she looked at the pages. "There were families who weren't just wolves," Hrothgar continued. "They were tied to the elements themselves, fire, stone, storm." He paused. "And ice." The heat in Arlen's chest pulsed. "The ice bloodline was thought to be extinct," Hrothgar said. "Wiped out in the territory wars 300 years ago. But your mother found proof that one line survived, hidden, dormant." "Me," Arlen whispered. "You." Hrothgar's eyes were grave. "Your mother knew. That's why she hid you, why she let them call you wolfless. If anyone had known what you really were, they would have killed me." "Yes." Arlen stared at the ancient text, her mind reeling. But why now? Why did it wake up? Trauma, desperation, the threat of death. Hrothgar leaned back. "The old powers don't emerge gently. They claw their way out when there's no other choice." "What does this mean?" "It means you're not cursed. You're not broken." His voice was firm. "You're the last heir of a bloodline that commanded ice and water like other wolves command their own limbs. And people are going to kill you for it if they get the chance." Arlen looked up at him. "Then what do I do?" Hrothgar stood. "You learn to fight." "You learn to fight." Hrothgar's words hung in the cold air between them. Arlen stared at him, her mind still trying to process everything he'd just told her. She wasn't cursed, wasn't broken. She was the last of something that should have been dead for 3 centuries. "I don't know how," she said finally. "Then you'll learn fast." Hrothgar closed the ancient book with a soft thud. "Because the moment word spreads about what you are, every territory in the frozen lands will either want to control you or eliminate you." "What about Frostfang?" Hrothgar's expression hardened. "Theron is pragmatic. He'll try to use you. His son, Cade, is ambitious and stupid, a dangerous combination. He'll see you as a threat to his future rule." "And you?" Arlen asked. "What do you see?" The High Alpha studied her for a long moment. "A girl who saved my life when no one else would. That buys you protection. For now." He moved toward the door. "But protection only goes so far. You need to become strong enough that you don't need it." "How long do I have?" "Days? Maybe less?" He paused with his hand on the door. "Cale Ironfang will train you. He knows more about the old bloodlines than most, and he owes me a debt." "Why would he help me?" "Because I'm asking him to, and because whether he admits it or not, he's curious what you'll become." Hrothgar opened the door. "Don't disappoint him, or me." He left. Arlen sat alone in the small room, surrounded by books that told stories of people who died before her grandmother's grandmother was born, people whose blood ran in her veins. The heat in her chest pulsed steadily, like a heartbeat that wasn't quite her own. She'd spent 21 years being nothing. Now she had to learn how to be something that shouldn't exist. Training started before dawn. Cale came for her while the stronghold was still dark, the corridors empty except for night guards who watched them pass with wary eyes. He led her down, always down, into sections of the mountain she'd never seen. They ended up in a cavern that looked carved by water rather than tools. The walls were smooth, black stone that gleamed wetly in the torchlight. A pool of dark water filled one corner, its surface perfectly still. "Hit me," Cale said, shrugging out of his heavy cloak. Arlen blinked. "What?" "You heard me. Hit me." "I don't—" "You threw Torin hard enough to crack his skull. You shattered stone when the healers pushed you, so hit me." He spread his arms. "Let's see what you can do." Arlen's hands clenched into fists. "I don't want to hurt you." "You won't." His winter blue eyes were steady. "But you need to try." She hesitated. Then she stepped forward and threw a punch. It was clumsy, telegraphed, the kind of punch someone throws when they've never been in a real fight. Kale caught her wrist easily, twisted it, and put her on the ground in one smooth motion. Arlen hit the stone hard, the impact knocking the air from her lungs. Again, Kale said, stepping back. She got up, tried again. He put her down again, and again, and again. After the 10th time, Arlen stayed on the ground, her body aching, her pride in shreds. "I can't do this," she gasped. "You're right. You can't. Not like this." Kale crouched beside her. "You're fighting like a servant who's afraid of getting hit. You need to fight like someone who has nothing left to lose." "I don't know how." "Yes, you do. You dove into water that should have killed you. You saved 7 wolves because you decided their lives mattered more than your fear." His voice was quiet but relentless. "That same person is still in there. You just need to stop apologizing for existing." Arlen pushed herself up to sitting. Her arms trembled. "They've spent 21 years teaching me to apologize." "Then unlearn it." Kale stood, offering his hand. "Fast." She took it. Over the next 3 days, Kale pushed her harder than anyone ever had. He taught her how to fall without breaking, how to read an opponent's body, how to turn fear into focus. He was brutal and efficient, giving no quarter, accepting no excuses. But he also taught her about the ice. "It's not separate from you," he said on the 3rd morning, watching as frost spread across her palms. "It's part of your blood, your bones. Stop treating it like an enemy. Feels dangerous. It is dangerous, so are claws and teeth, but wolves learn to control those." He gestured to the pool in the corner. "Go stand in the water." Arlen's stomach clenched. "Why?" "Because that's where your power lives. In cold. In depth. In pressure." He tilted his head. "You're afraid of it." "I almost drowned." "You didn't. And you won't now." His voice softened slightly. "Trust me." She didn't, not really, but she walked to the pool anyway. The water was freezing, so cold it felt like knives against her skin. She waded in until it reached her waist, her teeth chattering, her breath coming in short gasps. "Deeper," Kale said. She went deeper. The water climbed to her chest, her shoulders. She could feel the pull of it, trying to drag her down. "Now," Kale said from the edge. "Let it in." "Let what in?" "The cold. Stop fighting it. Let it become part of you." Every instinct screamed at her to get out, to run, to survive. But Arlen closed her eyes and stopped fighting. The cold rushed in. It filled her lungs, her blood, every cell in her body. For a terrifying moment, she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but feel the absolute zero trying to claim her. Then the heat in her chest flared, and suddenly the cold wasn't trying to kill her. It was listening. Arlen's eyes snapped open. The water around her had stopped moving, actually frozen in place, held suspended by something that felt like willpower made solid. "Good," Kale said. "Now come out before you freeze the entire pool." She climbed out, dripping and shaking, but something had changed. The heat and the cold weren't fighting anymore. They were working together, 2 parts of the same impossible whole. "What am I?" she asked, not for the first time. Kale handed her a dry cloak, something the territories forgot how to kill. On the 4th day, everything went wrong. Arlen was in the training cavern alone, practicing the forms Kale had taught her, when she heard shouting from above. Not the normal sounds of the stronghold. This was different, urgent, afraid. She climbed the narrow stairs back to the main levels and found chaos. Wolves were running through the corridors, warriors pulling on armor, servants being shoved into storage rooms and told to stay there. The air smelled like blood and fear. Arlen grabbed a passing guard. "What's happening?" He shook her off. "Get back to your room." "Tell me." "Shadow Peak is here, armed." He was already moving away. "They're calling for the council to answer for harboring forbidden bloodlines." Arlen's blood turned to ice. They knew. Somehow, word had gotten out. And Shadow Peak, one of the most aggressive territories, ruled by wolves who believed in purging weakness and anything that threatened the old order, had come to demand answers. Or worse. She ran toward the main hall, ignoring the guards who shouted at her to stop. She had to know what was happening, had to see. She rounded a corner and nearly collided with Cade. He grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise. "You, This is your fault. I didn't. Shadow Peak's Alpha is demanding we hand you over. Says you're an abomination, a threat to every territory. His ice-colored eyes were full of rage. My father is up there right now trying to keep them from burning this place down. Where's Rothgar? The High Alpha left 2 days ago. Some emergency in the Western Territories. Cade's grip tightened. You're on your own. He shoved her toward the side passage. Get out of sight. If Shadow Peak's wolves find you, they'll kill you, and I won't stop them. Arlen stumbled back, her heart hammering. Around her, the stronghold was preparing for war. She could hear steel being drawn, orders being barked, the low growl of wolves ready to fight, all because of her. She turned and ran. Not away. Toward. If this was happening because of what she was, then hiding wouldn't fix it, wouldn't stop it. She'd spent her whole life being invisible, letting others decide her fate. Not anymore. She made it to the Great Hall just as the doors burst open. Shadow Peak's delegation strode in like conquerors. 15 wolves, all armed, all radiating the kind of cold violence that came from never losing a fight. At their head walked Alpha Vakir Shadow Peak, a man built like a bear with scars crossing his face and eyes like frozen iron. Theron stood at the other end of the hall, flanked by his own warriors. The tension was thick enough to choke on. You harbor forbidden blood, Vakir said without preamble. His voice was deep, carrying the weight of absolute certainty. The ice line was extinguished for good reason. It cannot be allowed to rise again. The girl saved the High Alpha's life, Theron replied, his tone measured. She's under Frostfang's protection. Your protection means nothing. The old laws are clear. Elemental bloodlines are too dangerous to exist. Vakir took a step forward. Hand her over. Let us end this cleanly. No. The word came from Arlen. Every head in the room turned toward her. She stood at the edge of the hall, her clothes still damp from training, her hair wild, looking like exactly what she was. A girl who'd spent her life on her knees, but she wasn't on her knees now. You want me? She said, her voice carrying across the stunned silence. Then take me yourself. Vakir's scarred face split into a smile. Brave, stupid, but brave. He gestured to his wolves. Bring her. 3 of them moved forward. Arlen felt the heat in her chest surge, felt the cold answer it, felt power flood through her veins like lightning and ice combined. The first wolf reached for her. She caught his wrist and froze it. Not metaphorically, actually froze the flesh solid. The wolf screamed and jerked back, his arm encased in ice up to the elbow. The other 2 hesitated. I said, Arlen repeated, her voice colder than she'd ever heard it. Come take me yourself. Baker's smile vanished. You dare. I dare. Arlen took a step forward, and frost spread across the floor beneath her feet. You came here to kill me for something I didn't choose, something I didn't even know I was. So if you want me dead, Alpha Vakir, then you're going to have to do it in front of everyone, in front of witnesses, in front of the laws you claim to uphold. The hall had gone deathly quiet. She's right, Kale's voice came from the side entrance. He walked into the hall, his expression neutral but his hand on his sword. The old laws state that anyone accused of forbidden blood has the right to trial by combat, to prove their worth or die trying. Vakir's eyes narrowed. Iron Fang, this isn't your territory. No, but I speak for the High Alpha in his absence, and I say the girl has the right to defend herself. Against whom? Vakir demanded. Against you, Arlen said. 1-on-1, no weapons, just what we were born with. The silence that followed was absolute. Theron stepped forward. Girl, you don't know what you're... Yes, I do. Arlen looked at him, then at Vakir. You want to prove I'm dangerous, that I don't deserve to live? Then prove it. Fight me. Vakir studied her for a long moment. Then he laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. You're a child, untrained, wolfless. I'm the last of a bloodline that your ancestors couldn't kill. That should scare you. Arlen felt the power crackling under her skin, begging to be released. Unless you're afraid. That did it. Vakir's face darkened. Tomorrow, at dawn, the old arena. He pointed at her. I'm going to tear you apart, girl. And when you're dead, this madness dies with you. He turned and walked out, his wolves following. The hall erupted in noise, shouting, arguments, wolves demanding to know what the hell just happened. Arlen stood frozen, her heart hammering, her hands shaking. Kale appeared at her side. That was the stupidest thing you could have done. I know. Vakir has killed 37 wolves in single combat. He's never lost. Not once. I know that too. Then why? Because I'm tired of running. Arlen looked up at him. And because if I'm going to die, I'd rather die fighting than on my knees. Kale stared at her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, he smiled. Hrothgar was right about you. What did he say? That you were either going to save us all or burn the world down trying. He gripped her shoulder. We have until dawn. Let's make sure it's the former. They trained through the night. Kale pushed her harder than ever before, forcing her to move faster, hit harder, think quicker. He brought in other wolves to spar with her, each one bigger and more experienced than the last. Arlen lost every match, but she got better. Somewhere around midnight, Kale called a halt. Enough. You need rest. I need to not die tomorrow. You'll die faster if you're exhausted. He handed her water. Vakir is stronger than you, faster, more experienced. If you try to fight him like a normal wolf, you'll lose in under a minute. Then how do I fight him? Like what you are. Kale's winter blue eyes were serious. Stop holding back. Stop being afraid of your own power. The ice isn't something you control. It's something you are. Let it be what it was meant to be. And if I can't, then make peace with whatever comes after. He started to turn away, then stopped. For what it's worth, I think you can. I've seen fear in you, but I've also seen something else. Something that doesn't know how to quit. He left her alone in the training cavern. Arlen sat on the cold stone, listening to the drip of water, feeling the weight of tomorrow pressing down on her. In less than 6 hours, she would fight a battle she couldn't win, unless she became something she'd spent her whole life hiding from. The heat in her chest pulsed, steady and sure. Let me in, it seemed to say. Stop fighting, stop hiding, let me show you what we are. Arlen closed her eyes, and for the first time in her life, she said yes. The power flooded through her, not gently, not carefully. It crashed into her like a tidal wave, filling every space inside her, rewriting things she didn't even know could be changed. It hurt, burned and froze at the same time, tearing her apart and rebuilding her into something new. She could feel her bones strengthening, her blood cooling, her senses expanding. The darkness of the cavern became clear as day. She could hear water moving through cracks in the stone 100 feet away, could feel the temperature of the air shifting with each breath, and beneath it all, she could feel the ice. Not just in the pool, in the walls, in the very mountain itself. Ancient water, frozen for millennia, waiting for her. Arlen opened her eyes, and they were no longer quite the same color they'd been. She stood, and frost spread from her bare feet in intricate patterns. Whatever she'd been before was gone. What remained was something the territories had forgotten to fear. Dawn came too fast and too slow. They led her to the old arena, a natural bowl in the mountain where wolves had settled disputes for generations. The stone was stained dark with old blood. The morning air was brutally cold, the sky just beginning to lighten. Wolves packed the edges of the arena, hundreds of them, come to witness either justice or murder depending on who you asked. Arlen stood in the center wearing simple clothes, no armor, no weapons. Just skin and bone and power she was still learning to understand. Across from her, Vakir Shadowpeak waited. He'd stripped to the waist, his body a map of scars and hard muscle. He looked like violence given form. He looked like death that had learned to walk. Theron stood at the edge, his voice carrying across the arena. The challenge has been made and accepted. This ends when one cannot continue, or when one is dead. He paused. Begin. Vakir moved first. He was fast, faster than someone his size had any right to be. He closed the distance in 3 strides and swung a fist that would have caved in Arlen's skull. She wasn't there. She'd moved without thinking, the ice in her blood making her faster, smoother. Vakir's fist hit empty air. He spun, adjusted, came at her again. Arlen dodged, ducked, stayed out of reach. She could feel the crowd's confusion. They'd expected her to fight. Instead, she was running. Stand still, Vakir growled, frustration creeping into his voice. Arlen didn't answer. She was listening to the ice, feeling it guide her movements, show her where to step, when to turn. Vucker changed tactics. He shifted, bones cracking, muscles reforming, and his wolf erupted from his skin. Massive, dark-furred, with fangs like daggers. The crowd roared. A wolf. A real wolf, something Arlen had never had, could never be. The beast lunged. Arlen raised her hand and the air froze. Actual ice crystallized between them, a wall of it, thick and solid. Vakir's wolf form hit it and bounced back, snarling. The crowd went silent. Impossible, someone whispered. Vakir circled the ice wall, looking for a way through. Arlen could feel him trying to intimidate her, make her panic. But she wasn't panicking. She was angry. Angry at 21 years of beatings and starvation and being told she was nothing. Angry at a world that wanted her dead for being born. Angry at wolves like Vakir who decided who deserved to live based on fear and tradition. The ice wall shattered. Not because Vakir broke it, because Arlen released it. The shards flew outward like arrows. Vakir's wolf barely dodged, several pieces cutting through his fur, drawing blood. He shifted back to human form, breathing hard, his eyes wide with something that might have been fear. "What are you?" he demanded. "I'm the thing your ancestors couldn't kill." Arlen felt power flooding through her, responding to her rage, her will, her absolute refusal to die here. "I'm the ice that doesn't melt, the cold that doesn't break. I'm every frozen lake, every winter storm, every impossible depth." She raised both hands. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. Frost spread across the arena floor, climbing the walls, reaching for the sky. The moisture in the air crystallized, falling like snow. And beneath Vakir's feet, the stone began to freeze. He tried to move, but ice had formed around his ankles, spreading fast. He snarled and ripped free, his skin tearing, but more ice formed immediately. Arlen walked toward him. "You wanted to kill me because you were afraid," she said quietly. "You were right to be." She touched his chest. Ice spread from her palm, racing across his skin, into his veins. Vakir's eyes went wide. He tried to fight it, tried to shift again, but the cold was too deep, too complete. He fell to his knees, his body seizing, his blood trying to freeze in his veins. The crowd was shouting, some in horror, some in awe. Arlen could kill him, right now, freeze him solid and leave him as a warning. But she didn't. She pulled the ice back, left him gasping on the frozen ground, and stepped away. "I'm not a killer," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm not your enemy. I'm just someone trying to survive." She looked at the crowd, at Theron, at Kale watching from the edge. "But if you keep trying to destroy me, I will become what you fear most." She turned and walked out of the arena. Behind her, Vakir collapsed fully, unconscious but alive. The silence was deafening. Then, one by one, wolves began to howl. Not in challenge, in recognition. Arlen made it 3 steps past the arena entrance before her legs gave out. Kale caught her before she hit the ground. "You did it," he said quietly. "I should have killed him." Her voice was shaking. "Everyone knows that. A real warrior knows when mercy is more powerful than death." Kale helped her stand. "You just made yourself more dangerous than if you'd killed him. Because now they know you can, but you chose not to." Arlen looked back at the arena, at the wolves still howling, at Vakir being carried away by his pack. She'd won, she'd survived, and she'd changed everything. "What happens now?" she asked. Kale's expression was grim. "Now the real trouble starts. Because every territory in the frozen lands just learned that the ice bloodline is back, and they're all going to want a piece of you." Before Arlen could respond, a commotion erupted from the stronghold entrance. A scout came running, his face white with panic. "Attack!" he shouted. "The eastern border. 3 packs we don't recognize. They're demanding we surrender the Ice Witch, or they'll burn Frostfang to the ground." Arlen's blood turned to actual ice. They weren't coming for a duel. They were coming for war. They were coming for war. The scout's words echoed across the arena, cutting through the howls, silencing the crowd. Arlen felt Kale's grip tighten on her arm as every wolf in sight turned toward the eastern sky. Smoke, black and thick, rising against the dawn. "How many?" Theron's voice cut through the chaos. He was already moving, warriors falling into step behind him. "At least 60, the scout gasped. Maybe more. 3 packs we've never seen. They're not from any territory we recognize. Mercenaries, Cale said quietly, his face grim. Someone hired them. Arlen's legs still felt like water, her body drained from the fight with Fakir, but she forced herself upright. This is because of me. Yes. Theron reached them, his ice-colored eyes boring into her. They want you. The question is what we do about it. Give me to them, Arlen said. No. The word came from 3 voices simultaneously. Theron, Cale, and surprisingly Cade, who'd appeared at his father's shoulder. Cade's face was twisted with something between disgust and grudging respect. I don't like you, Voss, but Frostfang doesn't surrender to mercenary scum. We fight. Against 60 wolves? Arlen shook her head. You have maybe 40 warriors here. Half the stronghold is servants and families. This isn't your fight. It became our fight when we chose not to hand you over the first time. Theron's jaw was set. Now it's about Frostfang's honor. We don't break under threats. A horn blast shattered the morning, 3 long notes that meant one thing: enemy at the gates. The crowd scattered, wolves running for weapons, for armor, for their families. Arlen watched them go, her chest tight with guilt. These people, most of whom had treated her like dirt her entire life, were about to die defending her. There has to be another way, she said. Cale turned to her. What are you thinking? I don't know yet. Her mind raced. The ice in her blood was still there, humming quietly, waiting. But I'm not hiding while people die for me. Then come with me. Cale grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the stronghold. If we're going to do this, we do it smart. They ran through corridors filling with armed wolves. The stronghold was transforming into a fortress, shutters slamming closed, barricades being dragged into place, archers taking positions on the walls. Arlen had never seen Frostfang like this. It looked ready for siege. Cale led her to the eastern wall, where Theron was already standing, looking out over the killing field. And there they were. 60 wolves, maybe 70, spread across the snowy plain like a dark stain. They wore mismatched armor, carried weapons from a dozen different territories. Mercenaries. Exactly as Kyle had said. Wolves who fought for coin, not honor. But at their head stood someone different. A woman, tall and lean, with white blonde hair that fell to her waist and eyes like chips of amber. She wore black leather studded with silver, and even from this distance, Arlen could feel the power radiating from her. Who is that? Arlen asked. Theron's face had gone pale. That's Morvain the Pale. I thought she was dead. Who is she? A hunter, Cale said quietly. She specializes in tracking down and eliminating bloodline remnants. If there's an old family line that resurfaces, Morvain is the one territories hire to make it disappear. He paused. Permanently. Arlen's blood went cold. Someone hired her to kill me? Someone with deep pockets and a lot to lose if the ice bloodline comes back. Theron gripped the wall's edge. This isn't just about you anymore. This is someone making a move against the old powers. Against change. Below, Morvain raised her hand. The mercenary army stopped. Her voice carried across the frozen ground, amplified by something that wasn't quite natural. Frostfang, I have no quarrel with you. Give us the Ice Witch and we leave in peace. Refuse and we burn you out. Theron stepped forward. Frostfang answers to the High Alpha, not to hired killers. Leave our lands. Now. Morvain smiled. The High Alpha isn't here, and you're outnumbered. She gestured behind her. Last chance. Send out the girl or we come in and take her, along with anyone who stands in our way. Arlen felt every eye on the wall turn toward her. She looked at the faces around her. Warriors who'd ignored her for 21 years, servants who'd stolen her food and pushed her into walls, wolves who'd called her cursed and worthless. They were all preparing to die for her. Something inside Arlen snapped. Not the ice, something deeper. Something that had been building since she'd first dove into that frozen lake and refused to let people drown. She wasn't the cursed daughter of a servant anymore. She wasn't the wolfless failure who scrubbed floors. She was the last heir of a bloodline that had commanded winter itself, and she was done running. I'll go down there, Arlen said. Absolutely not, Theron started. I'll go down there, Arlen repeated, louder. But not to surrender, to end this. Cale grabbed her arm. You can barely stand. You just fought Vakir.
I know. Arlen met his eyes. But this is my fight. Mine. Not Frostfang's. She looked at Theron. Open the gates. Let me through. You'll die, Cade said flatly. Maybe. Arlen felt the ice in her blood stirring, responding to her will. But if I'm going to die, I'd rather do it protecting people than hiding behind them. Theron studied her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he nodded. Open the gates. Father, you can't.
I said open them. Theron's voice was iron. The girl has earned the right to choose her own death. The gates groaned open. Arlen walked through. Behind her, she heard Cale curse, then footsteps. He'd followed her. You don't have to. She started. Shut up, he said. You're not doing this alone. They walked across the frozen ground toward the mercenary army. Arlen's legs shook with every step, her body screaming at her to stop, to rest, to hide. But she kept moving. Morvain watched them approach, her amber eyes calculating. The Ice Witch herself, she said when they were close enough. And an Iron Fang heir. How unexpected. Call off your wolves, Arlen said. This doesn't have to end in blood. Morvain laughed. It was a cold, empty sound. Child, this ended in blood the moment you were born. The ice bloodline was exterminated for a reason. Too powerful, too unstable, too dangerous to the established order. I'm not dangerous to anyone who doesn't attack me. You're dangerous to everyone. You just don't know it yet. Morvain took a step forward. The ice doesn't just freeze things. It spreads, consumes. Given time, you could turn entire territories into frozen wastelands, could reshape the world itself. She smiled. That's why you can't be allowed to live. Who hired you? Cale demanded. Cale. Does it matter? Someone who understands that the old bloodlines died for good reason. Morvain drew a blade from her belt. Not steel, something darker, etched with symbols that made Arlen's eyes hurt to look at. Nothing personal, girl, just business. She lunged. Cale moved to intercept, but Morvain was faster. The blade sliced toward Arlen's throat. Ice erupted from Arlen's skin. Not carefully, not controlled. Pure defensive instinct made solid. A wall of ice 3 feet thick materialized between her and the blade. Morvain's weapon hit it and stuck, frozen in place. The mercenary army surged forward. Arlen, behind me! Cale shifted mid-stride, his wolf form bursting forth, crimson and silver fur, all power and speed. He hit the first wave of attackers like an avalanche. But there were too many. Arlen watched wolves pouring toward them, toward Frostfang, and felt something inside her make a decision. If they wanted ice, she'd give them ice. She dropped to her knees and pressed both palms against the frozen ground. The power inside her exploded outward, not in a wave, in a flood. Ice spread from her hands in every direction, racing across the battlefield faster than the wolves could run. It climbed their legs, froze their paws to the ground, turned the entire killing field into a glacier. Wolves screamed. Some tried to shift, to break free. The ice just grew thicker. Arlen could feel it all, every frozen limb, every crystallized breath, every heartbeat slowing under the cold. It was intoxicating and terrifying. She could crush them, all of them, just press down and let the ice squeeze until... Arlen, stop! Cale's voice cut through the roar in her head. She blinked, looked up. The mercenary army was trapped, frozen in place from the knees down. They weren't dead, but they couldn't move, couldn't fight, could barely breathe against the cold that had locked them in place. And Arlen was still pouring power into the ice, making it grow, spreading it further. Stop, Cale said again, his hand on her shoulder. He'd shifted back to human form, was crouched beside her. You won. Let go. Arlen tried. The ice didn't want to listen. It wanted to keep spreading, wanted to cover everything, wanted to turn the world into frozen perfection, where nothing moved, nothing changed, nothing hurt. Arlen, Cale's grip tightened. Come back. You're stronger than this. She focused on his voice, on the warmth of his hand against her frozen skin, on the part of her that was still human, still herself. Slowly, painfully, she pulled the power back. The ice stopped growing, stopped spreading. Arlen collapsed forward, gasping, her body shaking violently. Across the frozen battlefield, 60 mercenaries stood trapped, unable to move, staring at her with expressions ranging from terror to awe. Morvain was frozen up to her waist, her dark blade still stuck in the ice wall. Her amber eyes were wide. "What are you?" she whispered. Arlen forced herself to her feet. Every muscle screamed. Her vision swam. But she walked forward until she stood directly in front of the hunter. "I'm the thing you were hired to kill," she said quietly. "I'm the bloodline that won't die. I'm every frozen lake, every winter that doesn't end, every cold that gets into your bones and never leaves." She leaned in close. "And I'm letting you live. So you can go back to whoever hired you and tell them this: the ice bloodline is back. And if they come for me again, I won't be merciful." She turned and walked back toward Frostfang. Behind her, Kale raised his voice to carry across the battlefield. "Anyone who can move, run, now, before she changes her mind." The ice holding the mercenaries shattered. They ran, all of them scrambling over each other in their panic to escape. Morvain pulled her blade free and backed away slowly, her eyes never leaving Arlen. "This isn't over," she called. "I know," Arlen called back. "But today it is." Morvain turned and fled with the rest. Arlen made it 10 more steps before her legs gave out completely. Kale caught her, lifting her like she weighed nothing. "You're insane," he said, but there was something like admiration in his voice. "Completely, utterly insane. Did it work? You just sent 60 mercenaries running with their tails between their legs. I'd say it worked." The gates of Frostfang opened. Theron stood there, his expression unreadable. Arlen waited for condemnation, for fear, for the anger that always came when she showed what she really was. Instead, Theron stepped aside. "Bring her in," he said, "and someone send riders to every territory. Tell them what happened here. Tell them the ice bloodline has returned, and Frostfang stands with her." Murmurs spread through the wolves gathered at the gates, some shocked, some afraid, but some, and this was what made Arlen's breath catch, some looked at her with something that might have been respect. They carried her inside to the same room where she'd woken after the lake. But this time, when they laid her on the bed, Theron himself stayed. "You saved us," he said simply. "Again. I endangered you first, perhaps, but you also gave us something we haven't had in generations." He looked at her with those ice-colored eyes that had always judged her as worthless. "Hope that the old powers aren't gone, that we're more than just what we've become." "What have you become?" Arlen asked. "Small, afraid, clinging to traditions because we've forgotten how to create new ones." Theron stood. "You're going to change that, whether you want to or not." He left. Arlen lay in the soft bed, staring at the ceiling, her body aching, her mind reeling. She'd won, actually won. But Morvain's words echoed in her head. This isn't over. She was right. This was just the beginning. The door opened again. Arlen expected another healer, another warrior come to stare at the freak who could freeze armies. Instead, it was a servant. Young, maybe 14, with nervous eyes. She was carrying a tray of food. Real food, not scraps. The girl set it down carefully, her hands shaking. Then she did something Arlen had never seen a servant do before. She looked Arlen in the eyes. "Thank you," the girl whispered, "for showing them we're not nothing." Then she was gone. Arlen stared at the closed door, something tight and hot building in her chest that had nothing to do with ice. That girl had been invisible her whole life, just like Arlen, but now she'd seen someone like her stand up, fight back, win, and that changed everything. Over the next 3 days, Frostfang transformed. Word of the battle spread like wildfire. Wolves from other territories sent messengers, some offering alliance, some demanding explanations, some simply wanting to see if the rumors were true. The Ice Witch who'd frozen an army. The wolfless servant who'd become something the territories had forgotten existed. Arlen spent most of those 3 days unconscious, her body recovering from pushing the ice too hard, too fast. When she finally woke properly, it was to find Kale sitting beside her bed, reading an ancient book. "You're still here," she said. Her voice was rough, unused. He looked up. "Where else would I be?" "I don't know. Your own territory? Somewhere that doesn't involve babysitting the cursed girl?" "You're not cursed. You're annoying, reckless, and apparently incapable of not jumping into situations that should kill you, but not cursed. He closed the book. Besides, someone has to make sure you don't accidentally freeze the entire stronghold in your sleep. Can I do that? I have no idea. Which is why I'm still here. Arlen pushed herself up to sitting. Her body protested, but it was manageable. What did I miss? Hrothgar is on his way back. Should arrive tomorrow. He's bringing representatives from 6 territories to discuss what happens now. Cale's expression was serious. They're calling it the First Council of the New Age, very dramatic. They're going to try to control me. Some will. Others will try to kill you. A few might actually want to help. He leaned forward. The question is what you want. Arlen looked at her hands. They looked the same as always, rough, scarred, ordinary, but she could feel the ice beneath her skin, waiting. I want to not be afraid anymore, she said quietly. I want to stop hiding. Stop apologizing for existing. She met his eyes. I want to figure out what I am, and maybe help other people figure out they're more than what the world tells them. Cale smiled. Then that's what we'll do. A knock at the door interrupted them. It opened to reveal Theron, looking more tired than Arlen had ever seen him. She's awake, he said. Good. We need to talk. Cale stood. I'll give you privacy. No. Theron gestured for him to stay. You're part of this now, Iron Fang, like it or not. He looked at Arlen. I've received word from someone claiming to have information about your mother, about what she found in the archives. Arlen's heart stopped. What kind of information? The kind that explains why she died, and why someone very powerful wants you dead. Theron's face was grim. The message came from within the High Alpha's own council. Someone close to Hrothgar. Someone who says they can prove that your mother discovered a conspiracy that goes back 300 years. What conspiracy? That the Ice bloodline wasn't destroyed in the territory wars. It was betrayed, murdered, by wolves who feared what it could become. Theron paused. And those same families still hold power today. The room went very quiet. They're the ones who hired Morvain, Arlen said slowly. Most likely, and they won't stop with mercenaries. Theron moved to the window, looking out over Frostfang. When Hrothgar arrives tomorrow with the council, you need to be ready, because they're going to demand answers, demand proof that you're not the threat they've been taught to fear. And if I can't prove that, then we fight. Theron looked back at her. And this time, it won't be against mercenaries. It'll be against the territories themselves. Arlen stood, her legs steady beneath her for the first time in days. Then we'd better make sure I can prove it. She looked at Cale. You said you knew about the old bloodlines. Can you help me understand what I am? Really understand it? I can try. Good. Arlen felt the ice in her blood humming quietly, no longer fighting her, no longer trying to consume everything. It was part of her now. Not separate. Not an enemy. Just her. Because tomorrow, when the High Alpha and his council arrive, I'm not going to hide. I'm not going to apologize. She looked at both of them. I'm going to show them exactly what the Ice bloodline was meant to be, and let them decide if that's worth destroying. Theron studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Then I suggest you get some rest. Tomorrow will either make you a symbol of hope for every wolf who's ever felt powerless. He paused at the door. Or it will start a war that burns down everything we've built. He left. Cale stayed. You know this is insane, he said. I know. You could die. Actually die. Not just maybe, definitely. I know that too. And you're still going to do it. Arlen thought about the servant girl who'd looked her in the eyes and said thank you. Thought about 21 years of being invisible. Thought about her mother, who'd died protecting a secret that might save or destroy everything. Yes, she said. I am. Cale was quiet for a moment, then he smiled. A real smile, warm and genuine. Then I'm with you. Whatever happens. Why? Because someone once told me that the measure of a wolf isn't in their strength or their bloodline. It's in what they choose to do when the world tells them to bow. He stood. You've never bowed. Not once. Even when you should have. He moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I think tomorrow is going to change everything, one way or another. When he was gone, Arlen walked to the window and looked out over Frostfang. The stronghold was quiet now, the smoke from the battle long since dissipated. Somewhere out there, Hrothgar was coming with a council that would decide her fate. Somewhere out there, the wolves who'd murdered her bloodline 300 years ago were planning their next move. And somewhere deep inside her, the ice waited patiently. Arlen pressed her palm against the cold glass and watched frost spread from her touch in delicate patterns. Tomorrow, she would face the council. Tomorrow, she would learn the truth about her mother. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, for the first time in her life, Arlen Voss wasn't afraid. She was ready. She was ready. Dawn came cold and clear, the kind of morning where the air itself seemed to crystallize. Arlen stood at the window of her room, watching the sun climb over the frozen mountains, and felt the ice in her blood hum in recognition. Today would decide everything. A knock at the door pulled her attention. Kale entered, carrying clothes she'd never seen before. Deep blue fabric lined with silver thread, cut to actually fit rather than hang like a sack. "From Theron," he said, setting them on the bed. He said if you're going to stand before the council, you should look like someone worth standing for. Arlen touched the fabric. It was soft, expensive, the kind of thing she'd only ever handled while washing it for someone else. "I don't know how to be that person," she said quietly. "You've been that person your whole life. You just didn't have the clothes to match." Kale moved to the door. "Hrothgar arrived an hour ago. The council convenes at midday. That gives you time to prepare." "Prepare for what? I don't know what I'm walking into." "Then improvise. You're good at that." He paused. "Arlen, whatever happens in that room, remember, you've already survived the worst they could throw at you. Everything else is just politics." After he left, Arlen changed into the new clothes. They fit perfectly, and when she caught her reflection in the small mirror, she barely recognized herself. Not because of the fine fabric or the silver thread, because for the first time in her life, she looked like she belonged somewhere. The great hall had been transformed into a council chamber. The long tables were gone, replaced by a circle of chairs facing a center space. Already wolves were filing in, alphas and their advisors, representatives from territories Arlen had only heard about in whispers. Theron stood near the entrance, directing traffic with quiet authority. When he saw Arlen approach, he gestured her aside. "The wolf who sent the message about your mother," he said, keeping his voice low. "They'll reveal themselves during the council. Be ready for anything." "Who do you think it is?" "Someone with more courage than sense." His ice-colored eyes were serious. "Someone willing to betray their own position to tell the truth. That makes them either very brave or very desperate." The hall filled quickly. Arlen recognized some faces. Vakir Shadowpeak, still moving stiffly from their fight, refused to meet her eyes. Several smaller alphas watched her with expressions ranging from curiosity to thinly veiled hostility. And at the far end, in the seat of honor, sat Hrothgar Stormfang. The high alpha looked older than when she'd pulled him from the frozen lake. Tired. But when his eyes found hers across the room, something in them sparked with recognition. He nodded once. Arlen took her designated seat, not with the servants, not hidden in shadows, but in the circle itself, as an equal. The weight of every gaze in the room pressed down on her. Hrothgar stood and silence fell immediately. "We gather under ancient law," he said, his voice filling the hall, "to address a matter that affects all territories, the return of a bloodline thought extinct, the awakening of power not seen in 300 years. He looked directly at Arlen. "Arlen Voss of the Ice Line. Stand." Arlen stood, her legs steadier than she'd expected. "You are accused," Hrothgar continued, "of being a threat to the established order, of possessing power too dangerous to be allowed to exist, of representing a return to the chaos that the territory wars were fought to end." He paused. "How do you answer?" Arlen took a breath. Every lesson from 21 years of survival told her to bow her head, apologize, make herself small. She did none of those things. "I answer that I never asked for this power," she said clearly. "I didn't choose to be born to a bloodline that was hunted to extinction. I didn't choose to be orphaned, to be called cursed, to spend my life being told I was worth less than the dirt I scrubbed from your floors." Her voice gained strength. "But I also didn't choose to let the High Alpha drown. Didn't choose to let children die in frozen water. Didn't choose to hide while mercenaries threatened an entire territory." She looked around the circle,
meeting eyes that quickly looked away. So if you're asking whether I'm dangerous, yes, I am. But not because I want to destroy anything, because I refuse to be destroyed. Silence greeted her words. Then Vakir's shadow peak stood. Pretty speech, but it doesn't change what you are. The ice bloodline was eliminated because it couldn't be controlled, because it consumed everything it touched. You proved that yourself. You froze 60 wolves without breaking a sweat. What happens when you lose control in a populated area? When your power decides a territory needs to become a glacier? I didn't lose control. I made a choice. This time. What about next time? Or the time after that? Vakir's scarred face was hard. You're asking us to trust that you'll always choose mercy. History says that's a bet we'll lose. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the council. Arlen felt the ice in her chest stirring, responding to her rising anger. She forced it down. Then what do you suggest? She asked. Kill me? Hunt down and eliminate anyone who might carry this bloodline? How is that different from what was done 300 years ago? It's not different, a new voice said. It's exactly the same. And it was murder then, just as it would be murder now. Every head turned. A wolf stood from the circle, older, maybe 60, with gray hair and a face mapped with wrinkles. He wore the colors of Wintermaw territory, and Arlen recognized him vaguely as one of Hrothgar's senior advisors. Elder Brandor, Hrothgar said slowly. You have something to add. I have the truth to add. Brandor stepped into the center of the circle. I am the one who sent the message to Theron, and I'm the one who knows what really happened to the ice bloodline, because my family helped destroy it. The hall erupted, wolves shouting, demanding explanations, accusations flying. Hrothgar raised a hand, and slowly, quiet returned. Speak, the High Alpha commanded. Brandor looked old suddenly. Tired. 300 years ago, the territories were forming. The strongest packs were consolidating power, creating the structure we have today. But there were bloodlines that threatened that structure. Not because they were evil or destructive, but because they represented power that didn't come from pack hierarchy. Power that was inherent, not earned. He pulled out a scroll from his robes, yellowed with age. The ice bloodline was one of 5 elemental lines. They could shape water and cold the way we shapeshift. They were rare, but they existed. And the emerging alphas feared them. He opened the scroll, showing writing in a language most wolves no longer read. So they made a pact. 5 territories agreed to systematically hunt down and eliminate the elemental bloodlines. They called it the Purification, recorded it as the noble work of ending a dangerous era. Brandor's hands shook. They called it Purification. It was genocide. The word hit like a physical blow. My ancestor was there, Brandor continued, his voice breaking. He led the hunt for the ice line, tracked them to their last stronghold, and slaughtered them. Men, women, children. Everyone who carried even a trace of the bloodline. He looked at Arlen. Your mother found proof of this, found records that showed the purification for what it really was, a power grab disguised as protection. She was going to expose it, demand justice for the bloodlines that were murdered. So they killed her, Arlen said quietly. They exiled her first, hoping she'd disappear. When she came back with you, they realized the bloodline had survived, that she'd hidden you, protected you. Brandor's eyes were wet. They poisoned her, slowly, made it look like illness, and then they spent years poisoning you too, small doses, just enough to suppress your power, keep you weak and sickly so you'd never awaken. Arlen's world tilted, the heat in her chest, the strange warmth that had always been there. It wasn't just her power trying to emerge. It was her body fighting poison, fighting to survive. Who? Hrothgar's voice was deadly quiet. Who gave the orders? Brandor looked at 3 wolves in the circle. Alpha Greymarch, Alpha Blackwater, and Alpha Stoneridge. Their ancestors made the pact. They've spent 3 centuries protecting that secret. The accused alphas were already on their feet, voices raised in denial, in outrage. But Arlen wasn't listening to them. She was remembering. 21 years of weakness, of illness that no healer could explain, of being told she was cursed when she was being murdered, inch by inch. The ice in her blood surged. Frost spread across the floor from where she stood, creeping outward in crystalline patterns. The temperature in the hall dropped 20 degrees in seconds. Arlen, Kale's voice, calm and steady. Breathe. She tried. The ice kept spreading. They killed my mother, she said, her voice barely human. Poisoned me my entire life, and now they want to finish the job? Yes, Hrothgar said. He hadn't moved, even as ice crept toward his chair. Which is why you're going to prove them wrong. Arlen looked at him. How? By not becoming what they fear, by showing every wolf in this room that the ice bloodline isn't a threat to be eliminated. It's a strength we were fools to destroy. He stood. You saved my life, Arlen Voss. You saved children from drowning. You defended Frostfang against mercenaries. You've shown more courage and mercy than most wolves achieve in a lifetime. So show them now that you're in control, that you choose peace. They don't deserve peace. No, they deserve justice. And justice means you live, grow stronger, and prove that everything they did was wrong. Hrothgar's eyes were fierce. Don't give them the satisfaction of becoming the monster they tried to create. Be what you are, the last heir of a bloodline that survived because it refused to die. Arlen looked at the ice spreading across the floor, at the wolves watching her with fear and fascination, at the 3 alphas who'd ordered her death before she could even walk. She could kill them. Right now, freeze them solid and let them shatter, or she could be better than they'd ever been. Slowly, painfully, Arlen pulled the ice back. The frost retreated, melting into water, leaving the floor wet but undamaged. The hall released a collective breath. I want justice, Arlen said, her voice steady now. I want the truth exposed. I want the families who ordered the purification to answer for what they did. She looked at Hrothgar. But I won't kill for it. Won't become what they claim my bloodline was. Hrothgar nodded. Then it will be done. He turned to the 3 accused alphas. You will submit your territories to investigation. Every record, every document from the purification era will be examined. If Elder Brandor's claims are proven, and I believe they will be, you will face tribunal. This is outrageous, Alpha Greymarch sputtered. You're taking the word of a traitor and a— Choose your next words carefully, Hrothgar said quietly. The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Greymarch went silent. The ice bloodline is under my protection, Hrothgar continued, addressing the entire council. Anyone who moves against Arlen Voss answers to me personally. Is that understood? Silence. Then slowly, wolves began to nod. There's more, Brandor said. He looked at Arlen. Your mother didn't just find proof of the purification. She found something else. A location, where the last records of all 5 elemental bloodlines are hidden, including information about how they were meant to work together. Arlen's breath caught. There were others like me? Once. Fire, stone, storm, shadow, and ice. They were meant to balance each other, keep the territories in harmony. Brandor smiled sadly. Your mother believed that if even one bloodline returned, others might follow, that the old powers weren't gone, just sleeping. Where? Arlen demanded. Where are the records? I don't know. Your mother hid the location before she died, said it would be safer if no one knew. He paused. But she left a clue. Something only someone with ice blood could find. He handed Arlen a small piece of paper, so old it was nearly transparent. On it was written a single phrase in her mother's handwriting. Where winter never ends, the truth sleeps beneath frozen tears. Arlen stared at the words, her heart pounding. A quest. A purpose. A reason to become stronger than she'd ever imagined. I'll find it, she said quietly. Not alone, Kale said, stepping forward. If the other bloodlines are out there, that changes everything. Every territory will want control of that information. He looked at Hrothgar. She'll need protection, support. She'll have it, Theron said, speaking for the first time. Frostfang stands with the ice bloodline, whatever comes next. Other voices joined his. Not all of them, but enough. Arlen looked around the circle and saw something she'd never expected. Respect. Recognition. Hope. The council continued for hours, arguing about protocols and protections, about how to investigate the purification claims, about what the return of elemental bloodlines meant for the future of the territories. But Arlen barely heard it. She was thinking about her mother, about 21 years of poison and pain, about a woman who died protecting a secret that might change the world.
When the council finally ended, Hrothgar called Arlen aside. "You handled yourself well in there," he said. "I almost froze 3 alphas solid." "But you didn't. That's what matters." He studied her. "What will you do now?" "Find the records my mother hid. Learn what I am, what I'm meant to be." Arlen met his eyes. "And make sure no one ever hunts down a bloodline again." "For any reason," Hrothgar smiled. "Good. The territories need someone like you, someone who remembers what it's like to be powerless and refuses to let others suffer the same way." "I'm not a leader." "You became one the moment you dove into that lake." He gripped her shoulder. "Whether you wanted it or not." That night, Frostfang held a feast. Not for visiting alphas or political maneuvering, for Arlen. The Great Hall was packed with wolves who'd watched her scrub floors, carry their supplies, survive their cruelty. They watched her now as she sat at the high table, beside Hrothgar and Theron, dressed in clothes that marked her as someone who mattered. The servant girl who'd thanked Arlen days ago approached hesitantly with a tray of food. "You don't have to serve me," Arlen said gently. The girl's eyes went wide. "But I know what I am, and I know what you are." Arlen took the tray and set it down. "Sit with me. Eat. You've earned it as much as anyone here." The girl looked terrified. Then, slowly, she sat. Other servants watched, whispered, and one by one they began to stand a little straighter, look a little higher. Cale found Arlen later on the eastern wall looking out over the frozen landscape. "Quite the day," he said. "Quite the life," Arlen corrected. She was quiet for a moment. "Thank you. For training me. For standing with me when you didn't have to." "I had to. You annoyed me into it." He smiled. "Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't accidentally freeze the world while you're looking for your mother's secrets." "Will you come with me? When I go searching?" Kael looked out over the mountains. "Someone has to, otherwise you'll probably fall into another frozen lake and expect me to fish you out." Arlen laughed. Actually laughed. It felt strange, like using muscles she'd forgotten existed. "I never thanked you," she said, "for saving me from drowning. You saved yourself. I just pointed you in the right direction." Kael's expression grew serious. "What you did today, in that council, showing restraint when you could have taken revenge, that took more strength than any power you have. My mother would have wanted me to be better than they were. She'd be proud of what you've become." Arlen thought about the mother she barely remembered, about the woman who'd hidden her, poisoned though she was, and died protecting a truth that might free others. "I hope so," she whispered. The next morning, Arlen woke to find a package outside her door. Inside was a cloak, heavy, lined with fur, dyed the deep blue of winter ice, and pinned to it was a note in Theron's handwriting. "For the journey ahead. Return when you're ready. Frostfang will always have a place for you." Arlen held the cloak, feeling its weight, its warmth. 22 days ago, she'd been a servant, cursed, wolfless. Nothing. Now she was the last heir of an ancient bloodline, protected by the High Alpha himself, hunting for secrets that might reshape the territories. She'd survived poison, prejudice, and attempted murder. She'd faced down mercenaries and alphas. She'd learned to control power that should have destroyed her. And she'd proven that the girl everyone dismissed as worthless was stronger than any of them had imagined. Arlen put on the cloak and walked through Frostfang's corridors one last time. Servants nodded to her as she passed. Warriors acknowledged her. The stronghold that had been her prison for 21 years felt different now, like somewhere she chose to be, rather than somewhere she was trapped. Cale waited at the gates with horses and supplies. "Ready?" he asked. Arlen looked back at Frostfang, at the mountains, at the frozen landscape that had tried to kill her and failed. "Ready," she said. They rode out together, heading north toward mysteries and dangers neither of them could fully imagine. Behind them, Frostfang's banners snapped in the wind, and standing on the walls, watching them go, Hrothgar Stormfang smiled. The ice bloodline had returned, and the territories would never be the same. Arlen didn't know what she'd find at the end of her journey, didn't know if the other bloodlines truly existed, or if her mother's records would lead anywhere. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was no longer the forgotten girl who scrubbed floors while legends walked above her. She was Arlen Voss, last of the ice bloodline, and her story was just beginning. The frozen land stretched out before her, vast and unforgiving and beautiful. Somewhere in those depths, truth waited, and Arlen would find it. Not because she was chosen, not because she was special, but because she'd survived the worst the world could throw at her and refused to stay broken. That was power no one could take away. That was strength that couldn't be frozen, poisoned, or destroyed. That was what it meant to rise from nothing and become everything they'd feared. The servant who'd saved the High Alpha, the wolfless girl who'd commanded winter itself, the outcast who'd changed the world. Arlen Voss rode toward the horizon, her cloak streaming behind her like wings of ice and hope. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't running from the cold. She was embracing it,